Hi everyone, welcome to the ASMRHistory channel. This time, I will tell you a story about Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, the ambitious king of Rome. Find the most comfortable position for you right now. If you like this video, please push like button and subscribe this channel. Disclaimer: all content in this video was created with the assistance of artificial intelligence AI. The information, visuals, and narration presented are AI generated and may not fully represent historical accuracy. This video is intended for educational, entertainment, and creative purposes only. Viewers are encouraged to conduct additional research from reliable sources for factual information. Chapter 1: Introduction: The Rise of Rome's First Etruscan King. In the early centuries of Rome's history, kingship was less about crowns and palaces and more about survival. The city was still young, carved out of hills and valleys along the Tiber River, a cluster of huts bound together by ambition and necessity. Rome's earliest kings, Romulus, Numa, Tullus, and Incus, had each added something vital to the foundation of the city. Rome remained in many ways a frontier town, rough, martial, and humble in appearance. And came Lucius Tarquinius Priscus. Unlike his predecessors, Tarquinius was not born among the Latins or Sabines. His roots were in the wealthy and sophisticated lands of the Etruscans to the north. Etruscan cities were older and richer than Rome. They were centers of art, engineering, religion, and trade. To the Romans, the Etruscans seemed at once admired and feared neighbors whose power and culture loomed over them. Tarquinius carried that culture with him. He came from Tarquini, one of the most prominent Etruscan cities, and he brought with him not only wealth but vision. His arrival in Rome marked the first time that a foreign-born man would sit upon the Roman throne. This was more than a matter of personal ambition, it was a moment of transformation, when Rome began to absorb and imitate the grandeur of her neighbors. Where earlier kings had focused on defending and modestly expanding Rome, Tarquinius looked further. He wanted Rome to rival the great cities of Etruria. He wanted temples that reached toward the sky, public works that reshaped the land, and games that would awe the people. He saw in Rome's youth and hunger a city that could rise beyond its humble beginnings. But his story was not only one of monuments and triumphs. It was also a story of power seized and contested, of enemies plotting in the shadows, and of a crown gained through persuasion and ambition rather than simple inheritance. His reign would show both the promise and the peril of monarchy in Rome. To understand Lucius Tarquinius Priscus is to understand a turning point in Roman history. With him, the monarchy stepped into a new phase, one where Rome was no longer merely defending itself, but asserting itself, one where the city began to look like the Rome that history remembers, not a rustic settlement, but the seat of an empire. His rise would forever change the balance of culture, politics, and ambition in the city of Rome. Chapter 2: Origins: From Etruria to Rome. The story of Lucius Tarquinius Priscus begins far from the banks of the Tiber, in the ancient and powerful land of Etruria. Etruscans, though later overshadowed by the Romans, were a people of immense sophistication. Their cities rose on fertile hills, fortified with strong walls, adorned with intricate temples, and enriched by trade routes that stretched across the Mediterranean. They excelled in engineering, art, and religion. To the simple Latin farmers of early Rome, the Etruscans appeared as a people touched by the gods. Tarquinius was born into this world in the wealthy city of Tarquini, from which he later took his name. His father, Demaratus of Corinth, was a Greek nobleman who had fled his homeland amid political upheaval. Seeking fortune abroad, Demaratus settled in Etruria, bringing with him Greek customs, learning, and connections. There he married an Etruscan woman of high standing, and from this union came Lucius Tarquinius. From his father, Tarquinius inherited a sense of ambition, the restless drive of a man who had left one city to found a new life in another. From his mother, he inherited ties to the Etruscan elite and access to a culture of wealth and influence. Yet even with these advantages, Tarquinius' position in Tarquini was not secure. The city's ruling classes looked with suspicion on a man of mixed descent. The memory of his father's foreign origin lingered, and for all his wealth and ability, Tarquinius found his path to power blocked by the jealous nobility of his city. It was his wife, Tanaquil, who altered the course of his destiny. She was a woman of remarkable intelligence and ambition, skilled in the Etruscan art of interpreting omens. Tanaquil saw in her husband a greatness denied to him in Tarquini, but waiting to be fulfilled elsewhere. According to tradition, she read in the flight of birds and the patterns of the heavens that Rome, a city still young, still malleable, was the stage upon which he would rise to greatness. Together, Tarquinius and Tanaqua resolved to leave Tarquini behind. They gathered their wealth, their household, and their retainers and set out for Rome. The journey south was more than a physical passage, it was a symbolic break from the limitations of their old life. In Rome, they believed the barriers of birth and prejudice could be overcome by charisma, wealth, and vision. Legend tells that as they approached the city, an omen appeared, an eagle swooped down, seized Tarquinius's cap, and then, after circling majestically, replaced it upon his head. Tanaqua, skilled in augury, declared this a sign of destiny that her husband would one day wear a crown in Rome. And so they entered the city, not as exiles but as aspirants. Rome, though modest compared to the grandeur of Tarquini, offered what Tarquinius needed most: opportunity. Here he would not be judged by his father's foreign birth, but by his ability to win favor, to persuade, to lead. The city's throne was not secured by bloodline, but by the will of the Senate and the people. For a man of ambition, this was fertile ground. Chapter 3, Arrival in the Eternal City. When Lucius Tarquinius and Tanaqua arrived in Rome, the city was far from the majestic capital it would one day become. Its streets were uneven, its houses simple, its forum more a muddy clearing than a grand civic center. And yet, to Tarquinius, this was not a city to be scorned, it was a city of potential. Rome was still shaping itself, still young enough that a man of talent and ambition might mold its future. The king at that time was Ancus Marcius, the grandson of Numa Pompilius, and the fourth to sit upon the throne since Rome's founding. Ancus was a man of moderation, cautious, steady, and mindful of both war and peace. Under his reign, Rome had expanded its borders, built its first bridge across the Tiber, and secured its first seaport at Ostia. Ancus was not a reckless conqueror, but neither was he a recluse devoted only to ritual. His reign had been balanced, his authority respected. Into this ordered world stepped Tarquinius with the air of an outsider and the bearing of a noble. He did not hide his wealth, nor the refinement of his Etruscan upbringing. His clothing was rich, his manners polished, his speech persuasive. But he was also careful he did not come boasting of high birth or demanding honor. Instead, he presented himself as a man eager to serve Rome, to place his fortune and talents at the disposal of the king. Ancus Marcius, cautious though he was, recognized the ability when he saw it. Tarquinius's eloquence impressed him, and his generosity won him friends quickly among both patricians and commoners. He soon became one of the king's closest advisors, trusted in matters of both policy and war. Tarquinius had entered Rome as a foreigner. He was fast becoming a Roman statesman. Here, too, Tanaqua's influence was vital. While her husband won allies in the public eye, she worked quietly behind the scenes, reading omens, interpreting signs, and offering counsel. To the Romans, who valued religious approval in every decision, her reputation as a woman favored by the gods made the couple appear destined for greatness. Tarquinius distinguished himself in public life. He sponsored festivals, provided games, and gave generously to those in need. He was seen not only as wealthy, but as willing to share his wealth for the good of the city. His name became associated with hospitality and honor, and his popularity grew with each passing season. It was during this time that Ancus, confident in Tarquinius's loyalty, entrusted him with a grave responsibility, the guardianship of his sons. This trust would have lasting consequences, for when Ancus Marcius died, the throne did not pass to his children as expected. Instead, Tarquinius, foreign-born, ambitious, and beloved by many, would seize the crown for himself. But in these first years, nothing seemed out of place. Tarquinius was merely a noble newcomer, a friend to the king, and a man of promise. Rome welcomed him, not knowing that in this ambitious stranger lay the seeds of change that would alter the very character of their city. Chapter 4, Winning Favor with the People. In Rome, a king's power rested not solely on bloodline or divine sanction, but on the fragile balance of support from the Senate and the people. Lucius Tarquinius Priscus understood this better than most. He knew that wealth and noble bearing might open doors, but only generosity, spectacle, and persuasion could keep them open. From the moment of his arrival, Tarquinius began cultivating a reputation for liberality. He distributed gifts, hosted lavish banquets, and made himself visible in public life. When disputes arose among citizens, he intervened with fairness and eloquence. His home became a place where both patricians and plebeians might find welcome. Slowly, he wove himself into the fabric of Roman society. But Tarquinius was not content merely to be seen as a generous noble. He sought to win the hearts of the people through grandeur. He sponsored public games of a kind that Rome had never seen before: chariot races, athletic contests, and spectacles borrowed from the traditions of his Etruscan homeland. For a population accustomed to modest festivals, these entertainments dazzled the senses and stirred excitement. Rome began to associate Tarquinius with pleasure, abundance, and prosperity. The Senate, too, was not immune to his charm. He cultivated allies among the elder statesmen, listening attentively to their counsel, flattering their wisdom, and positioning himself as a loyal servant of the state. Many began to view him not as an ambitious outsider, but as a man who might carry forward the stability established under Ancus Marcius. Yet behind this careful courtship of favor lay Tanaquil's steady hand. She reminded her husband that destiny was within reach if only he would seize the right moment. Her skill and augury lent divine weight to his ambitions. When an omen appeared, a flash of lightning across a clear sky, a bird descending in strange flight, she was quick to declare it a sign of the gods' approval for Tarquinius's rise. Romans, deeply superstitious and ever mindful of divine will, began to see him as a man chosen by fate. King Ancus Marcius fell ill and eventually died. The question of succession arose. By right, the throne ought to have passed to his sons, whom Tarquinius himself had been charged to protect. But the children were still young, and Rome, vulnerable to enemies both within and without, could not risk instability. Tarquinius acted swiftly. Summoning the Senate, he argued that Rome needed an experienced leader, not inexperienced boys. He presented himself not as a usurper, but as a guardian of Rome's safety, claiming that he sought only to ensure continuity and order. His words carried weight. His years of generosity and spectacle had built a foundation of trust. The Senate, persuaded by his arguments and reassured by his popularity with the people, chose him as king of Rome. The sons of Ancus, outmaneuvered, could do nothing but watch as their guardian claimed the throne that should have been theirs. Thus, through ambition cloaked in service, Tarquinius Priscus secured the crown. It was not inheritance that made him king, but cunning, eloquence, and the favor of both gods and men. Rome had its first Etruscan ruler. The city would never be the same again. Chapter 5: The Seizure of Power. When the Senate proclaimed Lucius Tarquinius Priscus as king, the city seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Rome had avoided the chaos of a child king, and the people welcomed a ruler who had already proven his generosity and strength. To most Romans, it appeared a natural, almost inevitable decision. Not everyone shared this sentiment. In the shadows of the palace brooded the sons of Ancus Marcius, the former king. They had expected to inherit their father's throne, as tradition suggested. Instead, they found themselves pushed aside by the very man entrusted with their care. To them, Tarquinius was not a savior of Rome, but a usurper who had stolen what was rightfully theirs. The resentment simmered quietly, biding its time. Tarquinius knew this. He was too shrewd to believe his accession had silenced all opposition. The new king moved quickly to consolidate his authority. First, he rewarded his allies. The senators who had supported his claim to the throne were granted honors, wealth, and influence. Promises were made, favors exchanged, and gratitude secured. By binding the Senate more closely to himself, he ensured that any whisper of dissent would find little fertile ground among Rome's ruling class. Second, he sought to command respect through magnificence. Tarquinius understood that kingship was not only about ruling, it was about being seen to rule. He introduced new symbols of royal authority, more elaborate and dignified than those of his predecessors. Purple robe, the ivory throne, and the golden crown. These trappings, drawn from Etruscan custom, impressed the Roman people and reminded them daily that their king was no ordinary man. Third, Tarquinius turned his gaze outward. He knew that nothing united Rome more than a common enemy. By leading military campaigns against the Latins and Sabines, he both strengthened Rome's borders and provided the people with victories to celebrate. Spoils of war flowed into the city, funding public works and games that reinforced his popularity. And yet, for all his triumphs, the shadow of Incus' sons lingered. Their presence was a constant reminder that his kingship rested, not on bloodline, but on persuasion and power. Though outwardly calm, they harbored a deep, patient hatred. Tarquinius, ever watchful, sought to outpace their resentment with grandeur, hoping that monuments, victories, and prosperity would drown their claims. But beneath the celebrations and building projects, the truth remained. Tarquinius had taken the throne by cunning and boldness, not inheritance. His power was strong, but not unchallenged. He had seized the crown. Now he had to prove that he could hold it. Rome had entered a new era, and the line between kingship and usurpation had never been thinner. Chapter 6, Expanding Rome's Influence. No sooner had Lucius Tarquinius Priscus secured his crown than he turned his eyes outward. For Tarquinius, war was not only a necessity of survival, but also a tool of legitimacy. Victories would silence doubters, enrich the city, and etch his name into Roman memory. First challenge came from the Latins, Rome's southern neighbors. Long rivals, they had watched Rome's recent transition of power with keen interest. Some believed that the death of Incus Marcius and the accession of a foreign-born king might weaken the city. They tested this theory with raids and skirmishes, hoping to exploit instability. Tarquinius responded with characteristic energy. He marched against the Latins not merely to repel them, but to subjugate them. Town after town fell to his legions. According to tradition, he captured multiple Latin cities, bringing their wealth and people under Roman control. Prisoners were paraded in triumph, while their lands provided Rome with new resources. But conquest was not enough. Tarquinius had learned from his predecessors that expansion was sustainable only if it was bound to Rome through infrastructure. He brought captives back not just as slaves, but as laborers for his monumental projects. The swelling population added to the city's manpower, diversifying its character and strengthening its potential. The Sabines, fierce warriors from the central hills, were next to challenge Rome. They underestimated the resolve of the new king. In a hard-fought campaign, Tarquinius led his armies to victory, expanding Roman influence deeper into central Italy. Livy records that after defeating the Sabines, he doubled the number of senators, an act that both rewarded his supporters and symbolically elevated Rome to a greater level of power. Even the Etruscans, from whom Tarquinius himself hailed, came into conflict with Rome. The irony was sharp. The king of Roman destiny was now fighting against his own kin. Yet these wars were less about heritage and more about power. Etruscan cities, proud and wealthy, could not ignore Rome's growing strength. Tarquinius, for his part, was determined to show that Rome was no subordinate to Tarquini or any other Etruscan state. His victories against them established Rome as a rising power that could challenge even its northern neighbors. Each triumph brought more than land and riches. They brought prestige. For the Romans, who measured the greatness of a king by his military success, Tarquinius was proving himself worthy. Spoils of war funded his vision of a new Rome, one no longer a rustic settlement, but a city of spectacle, temples, and engineering marvels. By the time his campaigns had ended, Tarquinius had done more than secure Rome's borders. He had transformed the city into a force to be reckoned with, a power that no longer fought merely for survival but for dominance. The young kings before him had defended Rome. Tarquinius Priscus expanded Rome, and with each conquest, he moved closer to the legacy he desired, to be remembered not only as a king but as a founder of Rome's greatness. Chapter 7, Public Works and Great Monuments. Conquest gave Lucius Tarquinius Priscus wealth and captives, but it was vision that transformed those resources into the fabric of Rome. Where his predecessors had built walls and bridges to ensure survival, Tarquinius sought to give Rome the grandeur of an Etruscan city. His reign became a golden age of public works, each project reshaping the city and projecting its destiny as a capital of power. The Circus Maximus. Tarquinius understood the power of spectacle. He had already gained popularity by sponsoring games, but he now envisioned something permanent and unmatched, a stadium large enough to host the greatest contest Rome had ever seen. In the valley between the Palatine and Aventine hills, he laid foundations of the Circus Maximus, Here, Romans gathered to watch chariot races, athletic contests, and public festivals. The roar of the crowds echoed across the hills as men and horses competed for glory. For Tarquinius, the circus was more than entertainment, it was a political tool. Spectacle bound the people together, distracted them from discontent, and tied their joy to his kingship. Every cheer in the arena was, in a sense, a cheer for their king. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome, despite its growing size, still suffered from a problem as old as its founding. The low-lying ground between the hills was swampy, prone to flooding, and filled with stagnant water. This made the central forum nearly unusable for much of the year. Where others saw a nuisance, Tarquinius saw an opportunity. He ordered the construction of the Cloaca Maxima, one of the most ambitious engineering projects of the ancient world. Massive stone channels were dug to drain the marshes into the Tiber River, transforming uninhabitable land into the Roman Forum, the beating heart of political and commercial life. What had once been a swamp became a center of power and gathering. The Cloaca Maxima, still functioning centuries later, was a symbol of Tarquinius' foresight, a work for the ages. The Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. Of all his works, none was more ambitious or more symbolic than the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. On the Capitoline Hill, dedicated to the king of the gods, it was designed to be Rome's supreme religious center, a place that would not only rival but surpass the temples of the Etruscans and Greeks. The site itself required massive preparation, leveling the summit of Capitoline Hill and building massive foundations, though the temple would not be completed until the reign of his successors. It was Tarquinius who conceived it, who declared that Rome must have a sanctuary worthy of its rising destiny. For the Romans, the temple was more than a place of worship. It was a declaration that their city was favored by Jupiter himself. As long as the Capitoline Temple stood, Rome would be the chosen seat of divine power. Together, these works redefined Rome. No longer was it merely a city of huts clustered on hillsides. It became a city of stone, spectacle, and sacred grandeur. The circus united the people and joy. The Cloaca Maxima turned swamp into civilization, and the Temple of Jupiter proclaimed Rome's eternal destiny. Through these monuments, Tarquinius achieved something remarkable. He bound his memory to the very stones of Rome. Long after his death, his reign would be remembered every time Romans gathered in the circus, debated in the forum, or prayed on the Capitoline. In building for Rome, he built for eternity. Chapter 8, Military Campaigns and Conquests. While Tarquinius Priscus built monuments to endure for centuries, knew that Rome's survival still depended on strength of arms. No city in Italy could grow without war, for the peninsula was a patchwork of rival peoples: Latins, Sabines, Etruscans, Volsci, and others, each vying for land, resources, and dominance. To secure Rome's place among them, Tarquinius marched to wartime and again. Wars with the Latins. Latins, kin to the Romans by blood and language, were also their most frequent enemies. The Latin towns resented Rome's rise and resisted its growing influence. Tarquinius launched a series of campaigns to subdue them, combining diplomacy with force. Some towns were compelled to ally with Rome, others were conquered outright. From these victories, Rome gained new territories and, just as importantly, new subjects. Tarquinius followed the policy of his predecessor Ancus Marcius. Defeated peoples were not destroyed but absorbed into Rome. Their lands distributed among Roman citizens, their men added to the legions, and their families settled in the city. Battles against the Sabines. The Sabines, fierce highland warriors to the northeast, were another perennial threat. Tarquinius faced them in open battle and proved his generalship with a decisive victory. Ancient sources tell of Roman cunning. Tarquinius' forces captured their camp by stratagem, turning the tide and scattering the enemy. The triumph celebrated afterward was grand. Spoils paraded through the city, captives marched in chains, and Tarquinius himself rode in a chariot crowned with laurels. These displays reinforced his authority as king and reminded Romans that their ruler was not only a builder but also a conqueror. Etruscan conflicts. Ironically, though Tarquinius himself was of Etruscan origin, his reign brought Rome into conflict with other Etruscan cities. As Rome expanded, it inevitably clashed with powerful neighbors, such as Veii. Victories over them cemented Rome's claim to territory along the Tiber and established its reputation as a rising power even among the Etruscans. These wars also strengthened Tarquinius' position at home. By returning to Rome laden with spoils, he financed further public works and religious dedications, ensuring that every conquest abroad translated into visible benefits for the Roman people. A city transformed by war. Under Tarquinius, Rome became more than a fortified town. It became a regional power. Each conquest brought new wealth, new manpower, and new prestige. The city swelled with captives, artisans, and laborers who built the monuments that still bore the king's name. Yet Tarquinius' wars were not only about territory, they were about identity. With every victory, Rome was forged into something greater than the sum of its hills and huts. It became a people destined to rule others, convinced that conquest and expansion were not accidents of fortune but part of their very nature. Rome under Tarquinius Priscus stood taller than ever, secure within its walls, dazzling in its monuments and feared by its neighbors. But war and glory always came at a cost, and as his reign stretched on, new tensions began to emerge, tensions that no king, no matter how powerful, could fully escape. Chapter 9. Political intrigue and opposition. Though Tarquinius Priscus had risen from outsider to king, and though his victories filled Rome with wealth and monuments, not all hearts were loyal. Grandeur of his reign bred jealousy, resentment, and fear, especially among the old patrician families who had long guarded their influence. The patricians' resentment. Rome's nobility had never been fully at ease with Tarquinius. He was, after all, an Etruscan by birth, not of the ancient Roman stock. Other people admired his generosity and his public works. Many patricians whispered that his throne was illegitimate, won by ambition and cunning rather than destiny. His habit of incorporating conquered peoples into the Roman state further threatened their power. With every new citizen, the patricians' grip on the government weakened, their voices drowned in the swelling chorus of outsiders. For them, Tarquinius was not a king securing Rome's greatness. He was a usurper diluting their traditions. Ambition and fear in the Senate. The Senate, long weary of kingship itself, grew restless under his rule. Tarquinius often bypassed or manipulated the Senate to push forward his projects. While he commanded the loyalty of the army and the affection of the common people, he knew the patricians regarded him with suspicion. Behind closed doors, factions formed. Some senators grumbled openly about the dangers of monarchy, others plotted quietly, seeking allies who might topple Tarquinius and restore their dominance. Omens and doubts. The Romans were deeply superstitious, and rivals of the king seized upon rumors and omens. Some claimed the gods were displeased by his reign, that his vast building projects were acts of pride, that his Etruscan heritage angered Jupiter, that disasters looming on the horizon were divine warnings. Tarquinius countered with lavish religious ceremonies. He doubled Rome's priesthoods, introduced new rites, and ensured that every major project was dedicated to the gods. By cloaking his rule in piety, he attempted to disarm the whispers of impiety, the shadows of betrayal. But resentment could not be silenced forever. Among those who opposed him were men not only jealous of his power, but determined to end his life. Their conspiracies were whispered in shaded courtyards, planned at secluded banquets, sharpened with every blow Rome's greatness struck against its neighbors. Assassination had always haunted Rome's monarchy. Kings could rise by force and fall by daggers just as easily. Tarquinius, for all his triumphs, could not ignore the growing tension in the air, the watchful eyes, the hidden blades, the bitter oaths sworn in secret, the king's blind spot. Perhaps Tarquinius believed his strength made him untouchable. Perhaps he thought his popularity with the people and the soldiers was shield enough. Yet history shows that it was not foreign armies or the collapse of his works that doomed him. It was the silent enemies within Rome itself. The stage was set for tragedy as Tarquinius reached the height of his power. Master of Rome, builder of temples, leader in war, the knives of conspirators drew nearer. His reign, which had begun with ambition and vision, now teetered on the edge of betrayal. Chapter 10. Assassination and Aftermath. The reign of Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, the first Etruscan king of Rome, had stretched across decades of victories, construction, and ambition. Yet, as with so many rulers who rise high, His end came not on the battlefield, but in the shadows of his own city. The conspirators' plot. Among Rome's nobility, resentment had hardened into hatred. To them, Tarquinius was not a king safeguarding Rome's destiny, but an outsider who had usurped their birthright. Their power dwindled with each new citizen welcomed into the city, each conquest that swelled Rome's ranks with foreigners. The Senate could grumble, but grumbling was not enough. So a group of patricians turned to violence. They plotted in silence, choosing assassins to carry out the deed. Timing was everything, to strike not on the battlefield or in the forum, but at the heart of Rome itself, where the king least expected danger. The fatal day. The moment came when Tarquinius, now aged but still commanding, was surrounded not by soldiers but by attendants. The assassins approached him under the guise of petitioners. Concealing weapons beneath their cloaks, they pretended to present the dispute for judgment. Then, with daggers drawn, they fell upon him. The king who had raised temples and drained swamps, who had triumphed over Latins and Sabines, was cut down by blades wielded in treachery. Blood stained the floors where Rome's destiny had so often been debated. People's shock. The news spread like wildfire. The people were stunned. How could their mighty king, the builder of the circus and the forum, fall to such a cowardly act? Anger erupted among the citizens, many of whom adored him for his generosity and works. Yet fear also took hold. With the king dead, who would rule? Would Rome collapse into chaos? Tanaquil's intervention. Here, the cunning of one woman preserved the dynasty. Tanaquil, Tarquinius' wife, refused to let panic consume the city. Stepping forward with remarkable resolve, she addressed the people from the palace windows. She declared that the king was not dead but merely wounded, and that he had entrusted affairs of state to his protege Servius Tullius until his recovery. The ruse bought precious time. While Tarquinius' body lay lifeless, Servius began to act as king, gaining authority and legitimacy. By the time the truth of Tarquinius' death was undeniable, Servius was already established, and the city accepted him as ruler. Legacy amid bloodshed. Thus ended the reign of Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, not with a natural death in honor, but by assassination, the victim of Roman intrigue. Yet his legacy did not perish with him. His monuments remained. His wars had secured Rome's dominance, and his vision had given the city a destiny larger than any hill or wall could contain. For the assassins, their daggers achieved little. They silenced the king, but not the kingdom he had built. Rome, strengthened by his works, endured. His widow's cunning ensured that his line would continue through Servius Tullius and later, through his descendants who would shape the monarchy still further. Tarquinius Priscus' death was a reminder of the fragility of power in Rome. A crown could be won by courage and cunning, but it could be lost in an instant to conspiracy. Yet even in death, his shadow loomed over the city, its temples, its forum, its people, all testaments to the king who had dreamed Rome into greatness. Chapter 11, The Legacy of Tarquinius Priscus. History often remembers rulers not by the length of their reign, but by the marks they leave upon their people and their city. Though Lucius Tarquinius Priscus fell by daggers, his imprint on Rome endured far longer than the blades that struck him. His legacy was written into stone, into law, into the very rhythm of Roman life. The Builder King. No aspect of Tarquinius' legacy was more visible than his monumental works. The Cloaca Maxima transformed swampland into the Forum, forever making Rome center habitable and politically vital. The Circus Maximus provided a stage where generations of Romans would gather in excitement and unity, their passions tied to the city's destiny, and the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, begun under his vision, would stand as the supreme symbol of Rome's relationship with the gods. Centuries later, Romans would still point to these structures and recall the king who had dreamed them into being. He had given them not only utility but grandeur, the idea that Rome was destined for greatness. The model of integration. Tarquinius also reshaped Rome's social fabric. Where earlier kings had focused on survival, he sought expansion through inclusion. By granting conquered peoples land, rights, and a place within Rome, he strengthened the city with fresh manpower and diverse skills. This policy of integration became a hallmark of Roman growth, even as the Republic and later the Empire absorbed peoples across Italy and beyond. The principle that Rome's strength lay in embracing outsiders, found its roots in the reign of Tarquinius Priscus, himself once a foreigner who became king. The dual nature of power. Yet his reign also taught Rome a darker lesson that kingship was both powerful and perilous. Conspiracies that ended his life revealed the fragile balance between monarchy and aristocracy. His success inspired loyalty among the common people, but it also fanned resentment among the patricians who feared their own eclipse. Rome would never forget this tension. It would resurface in the reigns of his successors in the final downfall of the monarchy, and even centuries later in the struggles of the republic between senators and populist leaders. A king remembered. To later generations, Tarquinius Priscus was remembered as the ambitious foreigner who became Rome's great benefactor. Some praised his energy, vision, and generosity. Others whispered about arrogance, foreign influence, and the danger of kings who reached too far. Both images were true and both formed part of his legacy. Above all, he embodied the paradox of Rome itself, a city that welcomed outsiders but feared their power. A city that thrived on expansion yet trembled at change. A city that dreamed of eternity while living in constant struggle. Lucius Tarquinius Priscus may not have founded Rome, but he reshaped it into a city worthy of ruling others. His monuments stood as silent witnesses, his policies as enduring principles, and his assassination as a cautionary tale. In life and in death, he taught Rome what it meant to strive for greatness and what price might follow. Chapter 12 Conclusion: Rome's Path Forward. The story of Lucius Tarquinius Priscus is not merely the tale of one man's rise and fall. It is a chapter in the larger narrative of Rome's destiny. How a modest city on the banks of the Tiber became a power whose name would echo through millennia. A turning point in Roman kingship. With Tarquinius, the Roman monarchy changed forever. He was not born Roman, yet he became Rome's king. His ascent revealed that ambition and ability could outweigh birthright, a theme that would recur throughout Roman history. By welcoming a foreigner to the throne, Rome proved that its strength lay in adaptability, in drawing talent and energy from beyond its walls. But his reign also showed the fragility of monarchy. His assassination underscored that kingship in Rome was never absolute, always balanced against the will and resentment of the Senate and patricians. This tension would remain unresolved until the monarchy itself fell, replaced by the Republic. Rome the builder, Rome the conqueror. Tarquinius left behind a Rome that was greater in every sense, in stone, through his great projects that transformed the city's landscape, in numbers through the integration of conquered peoples, in power through wars that extended Rome's reach. He had made Rome not just a collection of hills and huts, but a true city-state of ambition and grandeur. His reign foreshadowed the Rome of the Republic and Empire, a Rome of engineers, warriors, and statesmen. The road ahead. After his death, Servius Tullius continued his legacy, building upon the foundations Tarquinius had laid. Yet the very achievements of these kings set in motion the struggles that would ultimately overthrow the monarchy. The grandeur of the Tarquins stirred pride in the people, but also fear in the aristocracy, paving the way for revolution and the birth of the Republic. In this way, Tarquinius' reign was both a triumph and a warning. He demonstrated the heights Rome could reach under strong leadership, but also the dangers of power concentrated in one man. His story reminds us that Rome's greatness was never the work of a single king or general, but the product of conflict, compromise, and continuity across generations. Rome's eternal lesson, to walk through Rome even centuries later, was to see the hand of Tarquinius, the circus where crowds roared, the forum where citizens gathered, the Capitol lion crowned by Jupiter's temple. He had dreamed of a Rome worthy of eternity, and in many ways he succeeded. The lesson of his reign is clear. Rome was destined not to stand still, but to grow, to adapt, to absorb, and to rule. Each king, each war, each monument brought it closer to the empire. Tarquinius Priscus, the foreigner who became king, helped set that course. Thus, Rome's path forward was shaped by his vision. Though assassins cut short his life, they could not erase his works or his influence. In stone, in memory, in policy, he remained. His reign was a beacon of Rome's ambition, a testament to its resilience, and a reminder that even in tragedy, Rome always looked beyond the present toward eternity.